You have probably heard about consulting before. Maybe you're still at uni and you're looking for a job and this industry piques your interest. Maybe you know someone working at Deloitte and you have heard them try to explain what they do over and over again and still don't get it. Or even maybe you actually work in consulting and yet you don't fully understand why clients hire your company, let alone what other companies do, because let's face it, what the frick do consultants actually do? Hello, my name is Juan and I'm a full-time business analyst working in consulting, and in this video I'm going to try my best to explain what consultants actually do in their day-to-day life, covering things like traveling, working hours, and the actual work itself. I'll also talk about all of the different sectors that consultancies work in, naming a few companies. Yes, I will also talk about compensation and give you precise figures if you're into that sort of thing. And finally, I will tell you about my experience so far and what I do in my typical day, although as you will see, there is no such thing as a typical day when you work in consulting. But first, let me tell you a bit about myself. Some of you may already know this, but I'm actually a fully qualified aerospace engineer, having graduated from an integrated master's at the University of Bath. And as you do when you spend 4 to 5 years sitting in a lecture hall learning about the intricacies of building exciting machines like planes, helicopters, and rockets, I decided that maybe working as an engineer was not for me, at least not for now. Anyway, halfway through my degree, I started looking at consulting with a bit more interest and decided that it could be the most appropriate next step in my career. And tens of interviews and also like 50 rejections later, in my final year at uni, I started landing full-time jobs in consultancy firms, and here I am, 1 year later, working as a full-time business analyst in London, ready to tell you about my experience. But first, let's address the big question. What do consultants actually do? If you're a bit like me, in the past you have probably heard the names of these companies that just seem to be printing money out of thin air. The Big Four: Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, EY, the MBB Group, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, or all of these other firms that just seem to be making loads of money, yet no one really knows or understands what they actually do. Well, in essence, every consulting company operates under the same principle. They charge a client a fee, sometimes quite an expensive one, in exchange for some sort of advisory. And okay, that is still a pretty vague definition, but the reality is that there are so many projects in consulting that it would be too long-winded to put in one single video. However, I have grouped them under 3 categories that, in my opinion, represent the industry quite well: M&A due diligence, strategy, and implementation. I must say though that a lot of companies, especially Big Fours, do work in areas like legal, tax, or audit, but in this video I'm just gonna stick to those 3 categories. So what is M&A due diligence then? Well, in the world of business, buying and selling companies is a lot more common than what you would expect. In fact, there are millions of companies bought and sold every single year, and the whole process, this transaction of buying and selling a company, is called a merger or an acquisition, M&A for short. And a pretty obvious thing that you need to do before buying a company is investigating and analyzing the company that you're about to buy. In other words, before buying a company, you need to do your due diligence, and for this, you typically hire a consultancy firm. Now, for those of you who are still wondering, there are a number of reasons behind buying a company, and I don't want to go into excessive detail into any of these, but just to name a few, maybe you are a big energy company, and you're looking to acquire another company that has renewable energy products in their portfolio, just to polish a bit your brand image. Or maybe you're a software provider and you see a company with interesting technology and you just want to acquire it to uncover and leverage the potential of that new tech. Maybe you are a manufacturing company and you want to expand internationally, and for that a good idea could be to buy a local player for its client base and their expertise in that local market that you're trying to penetrate. Or, on the other hand, you may be a private equity fund and you're just looking to buy a company that will perform well over the next 4 to 5 years and then just sell the company for a profit. In any of these cases, companies are very willing to pay large sums of money to consulting firms for their expertise and advice in going forward with a deal or not. The reality is, when you're looking to spend tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds in buying a company, you're probably also willing to pay a couple $100,000 to a consultancy just to get third-party advice on the deal. And these projects, called due diligences, that then can be subcategorized into things like FDDs, CDDs, VDDs, whatever, they're typically a few days to a couple of weeks long and usually pretty intense because the buyer will want to buy as soon as possible. Now, on the other hand, there are a lot of projects that can be categorized under the tag strategy. And the concept here is so broad that it could be something as specific as wanting to buy a particular helicopter model and wanting advice on if it is the most adequate option for your needs, or maybe you are simply a company that has been experiencing some financial difficulty and you have seen your profitability decrease after years of cost increases, and you hire a consultancy firm to look at the problem and give you advice on what the best course of action is. In general, I once read the analogy that strategy consulting is actually like going to the doctor and the doctor diagnosing and helping out a patient company. And I have to say that quite often this is a very accurate way of describing it. Actually, the process could be as follows. First, the assessment of the symptoms. More often than not, when clients hire a consultancy firm, it is because they realize some kind of problem or challenge that they need to face. This could be anything from decreasing profits to complex merger integrations, to a particular product that is just not performing that well. And here, what consultants need to do is to define the problem with the client, in a similar way to that of a patient going to a doctor and telling the doctor what is wrong. For example, I have a sore throat. Once you have identified the problem, the second step would be the diagnosis. And this is when consultants go away and collect data from documents, processes, interview key people in the company, and basically get their hands on every single document that they can get their hands on and analyze it. And by comparing those results to similar issues that they have seen in the past, they're typically able to pinpoint the root of the problem, the same way that a doctor would diagnose an illness. And finally, there's the prescription. Again, from experience, consultants are able to come up with a number of key recommendations to help their clients in tackling whatever problem they may have, similar to a doctor prescribing a medicine to combat the illness. And this whole process could very well constitute a project on its own, but it typically leads to a third kind of project that consultancies will try to sell to its clients as follow-on work: implementation. Implementation projects can be sold independently or as follow-on work for a previous strategy project, and in the same way as before, they can also cover a pretty wide spectrum. You have companies with the ability to guide clients on very technical problems, like, for example, implementing a machine learning tool to a particular certification process or improving a CRM database, to steering middle managers to help them implement the recommendations that were previously prescribed as part of that previous strategy project. Okay, then what does the typical day in the job look like? Well, I have to say, as cliche as it may sound, there is no such thing as a typical day. And this is because it depends on several factors. 1, if you are staffed on a project or not. 2, what type of project you're in. And 3, what phase of the project you're in. Now, if I had to give you an answer, then talking from experience, I would say my typical day usually involves things like building models in Excel, building slides on PowerPoint, interviewing the client, or brainstorming with the rest of the team, which, from what I can tell, I think it's pretty representative of what a typical day in consulting would look like. Another really exciting thing about consulting is that you can get to travel quite a lot, and it is often the case, especially on strategy projects like the one that I'm currently staffed on, that you spend some time at the client side. For example, I am now working with a client that is based in Belgium, and I've been flying in and out of Brussels pretty much every other week to attend interviews and workshops in person. Although here, as a disclaimer, I must say that the amount of travel that you will get will depend on the company and the project that you're staffed on. Plus, I also wanted to make a few comments here because from the outside, I often see traveling as being idealized, and although it is obviously exciting to go to the airport with your little suit and to get points and rewards and to go on expensive dinners and fancy hotels that you just expense to the client, it is often the case that you don't have time to visit anything else apart from the office or the hotel room that you're gonna get into at night to sleep. Personally, I don't mind traveling now and then, but I can also see the disadvantages in traveling too often, and I know that it can get heavy after quite some while. So next time that you hear about it, just bear it in mind. Right, before ending the video, let's talk about 2 of the most frequently asked questions that I get all the time. working hours and compensation, and maybe debunk a myth or two as we go along. Something that you typically hear before going into consulting is that you will work crazy hours. And while it is true that it is by no means a 9-to-5 job where at 5 everyone closes their laptops and by 5:05 there is no one in the building, it is not like investment banking or some law practices where I've heard horror stories of people working from 9 to 2 or 3 a.m. for 3 weeks straight. Now, big disclaimer here, when it comes to things like working hours and compensation, it will really depend on your company, so I will try to be as objective as I can, and although I think I have quite a lot of friends in the industry, so I have quite a broad picture of what it can be like, maybe take it with a grain of salt, just in case. There are two main premises that I think are true across all consulting firms, and that is one, that work is very cyclical, and that is just because of the nature of project-based work, and two, that you will not be expected to work 70-hour work weeks all of the time, as you would do in investment banking, for example. Once again, your working hours will be quite flexible and depend on things like the type of project. And I've had days where I've signed off before 5 and others where I've had to work past midnight. However, I would say that my typical day when I'm staffed on a project will be anything from 9 a.m. to 7 or 8 p.m, with some firms being more extreme where you will not be expected to leave before 9 p.m. What I would say though is that if you've had a tough course at a tough university, you've probably had way worse periods, and if you like what you do, it is quite bearable. Now, what everyone wants to know: compensation. First things first, if you're trying to get rich fast, then consulting is not for you. You're probably better off working in investment banking, corporate law, or being a professional footballer or something, so let's get that out of the way first. Again, salaries in consulting will heavily depend on your company, so I will give you the figures in a range from lowest to highest, but above all, they depend on the role, and these are pretty standard across different companies, although for some reason they all have different names for them. A typical career path in consulting will look as follows. The entry-level role will be called analyst/associate, then you will become a senior analyst or senior associate, then you have consultant, then manager, director, and when you really start making the big bucks is when you reach partner level. Since I'm based in London, I know the London market best, but just for the sake of it, I will also give you the New York equivalent because I also have some information about salaries in New York. The starting salary for an analyst in London will be anything from £30,000 to £35,000 at the lowest to £50,000 to £60,000 at the highest. Whereas if you live in New York, you can expect anything between $70,000 to $80,000 at the lowest and $120,000 to $130,000 at the highest. I will not go through the whole tree, but as a rule of thumb, you can expect those salaries to double by the time that you get to consultant/manager level, with the high band of that being even more generous at some firms. So that would be anything between £60,000 to £70,000 at the lowest and £120,000 to £140,000 at the highest. However, as I said before, the money is with the partners, and that is because if you reach partner level at a prestigious firm like any of the MBBs or other top boutiques, you will be looking at anything from $500K to a couple millions in compensation, which is pretty mind-blowing, but not an easy thing to achieve, as you can already imagine. Again, if you've reached this far in the video, it would really help if you could leave a like, comment, or subscribe to the channel, as it really helps a small channel like this one grow. But other than that, have a great day and catch you in the next video.